Ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle once said, "Man is a logon ekon, or word bearer." The normative way to be a rational and reasonable creature is to express the depth of our experience in words. In other words, to talk is to be human. I'm Andrew Petiprin, Fellow of Popular Culture at the Word on Fire Institute. In the 20th century, the Jewish philosopher Martin Buber, building on centuries of pagan, Jewish, and Christian philosophical tradition, described the deep spiritual connection between humans and God and humans and one another through the concept of talking and listening. At my very core, my truest self, my I cries out to know and be known, to see and be seen by the source of my being, the you I talk to when I pray, "Hallowed be thy name." Likewise, in most of our mysterious and wonderful conversations with other human beings, there can be a connection of an I to a you. That's something far greater than the words of the two people just having a chat. Sometimes a conversation suddenly feels like a transcendent religious ritual. Time may seem to stand still. Emotion may pour out from us unexpectedly. We realize there is more than this. We feel connected and truly alive. Deep conversations with fellow humans may even lead to a new pattern of life where talking and listening to God, the great I Am, becomes the new animating principle of a person's existence. The Word of God comes alive. Meaningful talk is the cornerstone of any good film script. And 3 entirely secular films with meaningful dialogue may help us catch a glimpse of what sacred conversation looks like. Louis Malle's 1980 film, My Dinner with Andre, Sofia Coppola's 2003 film, Lost in Translation, and Gus Van Sant's 1997 film, Good Will Hunting. My Dinner with Andre is a most unusual film, which could just as easily be done on a theatrical stage. It is an almost real-time conversation over dinner between 2 old friends who have not seen each other in some time. Co-written by Andre Gregory and Wallace Shawn, the script contains many details that are true to the 2 men's lives, including their names and information about their families and careers. These details are jumping-off points for deep discussion. The film begins and ends with Wally's interior monologue, and we remember in his words to himself that our self-talk is often the place of the greatest unreality. It is usually the voice in our own heads that repeats negative messages and tells us what we are afraid of. In difficult times, our interior monologue is not a place of love, but of doubt and anxiety. Wally mutters to himself that he may never make it as a playwright. He'll always be worried about paying the rent. Wally reluctantly agrees to meet Andre at a very fancy place, and when the 2 men sit down together, we are quickly drawn into Andre's strange tales of spiritual quest. He recounts one weird coincidence and one wild encounter after another. Andre tells a bewildered Wally how he has been able to look more deeply into his own soul and see more about the truth of the world. Andre describes taking a theater troupe into a Polish forest where they performed a spontaneous theatrical experiment. Their actions answer the questions that the famous acting teacher Konstantin Stanislavski said every actor must ask himself about the character he is playing. Who am I? Why am I here? Where do I come from? And where am I going? How many of us routinely ask ourselves such questions, let alone tell a friend over dinner about experiences that force us to face them? Andre is in a fragile state of mind, and yet he is an I, an authentic human, seeking both meaningful human interaction and communion with the divine. Andre talks and talks, while Wally looks on incredulously. The waiters bring one course after another, but the rest of the world around them seems hung in suspended animation. Wally finally begins to come alive to Andre's ramblings. Wally laments that in ordinary life, he can only express his feelings weirdly and indirectly. He declares that people are only talking in symbols, and that no one says what they're actually thinking about. Andre replies, "We are all too busy performing. No I, no you, just an it, in front of a sea of its." A little later, Andre pushes the issue all the way into the realm of the religious. He says, "Every action of ours should be a prayer, a sacrament in the world." Ironically, Andre believes that the theater, like the church, offers the opportunity to bring people into contact with reality. In the self-conscious exercise of playing a part in a play, or in actively participating in the liturgy of the Mass, we stop passively playing the dehumanizing roles that we have unconsciously settled into in our ordinary activities. We get a more authentic expression of intimate relationships and a more direct contact with a living God. Andre and Wally both agree that the modern world has a tendency to turn us into robots, and Andre concludes that the problem can only be solved by a new kind of language between people. Although Wally has been deeply engaged in Andre's discourse, he suddenly pushes back, indicating that he doesn't ultimately feel a need for more than what he can see. Maybe the world he inhabits is real enough. The dinner ends, and with it, the conversation. Although Andre has seemed like the fragile soul, it is Wally who walks away looking lost. He's afraid of his friend's words because he's afraid of what is inside his own heart. Perhaps, too, he is afraid of God and everything a life of intimate conversation with God entails. Sofia Coppola's intriguing 2003 film Lost in Translation explores some of the same themes as My Dinner with Andre, albeit with less direct concern for the divine, but also with more hope at the end. Coppola won the Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay, and both Bill Murray, who plays a famous actor named Bob Harris, and a very young Scarlett Johansson, who plays the newlywed Charlotte, were lauded for their performances. Bob and Charlotte are two Americans who find themselves in Tokyo, bored, confused by the foreign culture, and disconnected from the people they love. Bob's wife and children are back in the States, and he is on an extended trip abroad, alone, to make some supposedly easy money as the spokesman for a Japanese whiskey company. His solitude brings his ongoing midlife crisis to the forefront. Charlotte is accompanying her photographer husband on a work trip. She is the typical graduate character of modern fiction, smart, attractive, and completely unsure what to do with her life. On the surface, Bob and Charlotte are unlikely conversation partners. In scene after scene, Coppola depicts Bob and Charlotte looking completely out of place in their surroundings, emphasizing their obvious emotional, psychological, and spiritual disconnection. As the film's title suggests, in situation after situation, they simply cannot speak to the people around them. They can't talk, nor can they understand what is being said to them. They feel like inanimate objects, not active subjects. It's instead of I's. As Bob prepares to deliver his lines on the set of the Suntory whiskey commercial, the director unleashes a slew of words, summed up awkwardly by the translator, who tells Bob to look in the camera. Bob is incredulous. He says, "Is that everything? It seemed like he said quite a bit more than that." Charlotte is forlorn about her fledgling marriage. Her husband, John, played by Giovanni Ribisi, is buzzing around their hotel room, telling her about celebrities he has photographed and apologizing in advance for dashing off again to do more work. Charlotte walks around in her underwear trying to get his attention, and she makes comments that John does not react to. John addresses Charlotte directly only to criticize her for indulging in smoking cigarettes. In tears, Charlotte calls her friend Lauren, who does not detect Charlotte's loneliness and sadness. The two briefly engage in some chit-chat, but Lauren quickly has to hang up. After more depressing and humorous scenes of silent alienation, Bob and Charlotte finally meet. At first, it's small talk, but they reveal some information up front. Bob and Charlotte both mention their spouses right away, establishing that whatever relationship may develop between them will not be sexual. As the film unfolds from here, we discover that they need each other not to replace deficiencies in their marriages, physical or otherwise. Rather, they need refreshment for their souls through effortless, enriching conversation so that they may resume life at home. They need someone who speaks their language. Charlotte's husband leaves Tokyo for a few days, and Charlotte and Bob have one easy conversation after another. These talks contrast sharply with awkward phone calls between Bob and his wife back in America, who is concerned with practicalities of home life and is impatient for Bob to pick out a color for the carpet in his redecorated den. Bob's wife hangs up without hearing Bob's "I love you." Bob and Charlotte then have their most meaningful conversation. Each can be an I to the other's you. Charlotte tells Bob, "I'm stuck. Does it get easier?" Bob speaks to Charlotte with a fatherly tenderness, saying, "You'll figure that out. I'm not worried about you." They discuss marriage and career, the kind of stuff that starts at the surface level, but can quickly reach down to a touchstone in the soul. The conversation ends when Bob and Charlotte fall asleep on Bob's bed, totally innocently, breaking both of them out of an intolerable insomnia and representing a divine peace that only the grace of real human conversation can impart. And then, Bob really messes up. In another awkward phone call with his wife, Bob tells her he is completely lost. She asks him, "Do I need to worry about you, Bob?" And he replies, "Only if you want to," just as she has to get off the phone. In his unhappy return to a disconnected state with his wife after the solace of meaningful discourse with Charlotte, Bob sleeps with a lounge singer performing in the hotel. When Charlotte finds out, she displays an obvious sense of betrayal, and she and Bob lose their ability to converse intimately. Charlotte declares, "She is closer to your age. You could talk about things you have in common." It's the loss of the psychologically and spiritually enriching conversation that hurts Charlotte the most. At the end of Lost in Translation, Bob has one last chance to reclaim the sacred discourse with Charlotte and empower both of them to find new life in the old lives to which they are returning. Although, presumably Bob will have to face the heartbreak of his infidelity to his wife at some point in the future. As Bob is riding to the airport, he sees Charlotte walking, and he gets out of the car. He approaches her and whispers in her ear, words that we, the audience, are not privy to. Whatever the words are, there is something special, even magical in them. Charlotte blends back into the Tokyo crowd with a confident smile on her face and a love note from her husband printing out of the fax machine back at her hotel. Thereafter, Bob's ride to the airport is nothing but green lights, clear roads, and blue skies. Our third example of the power of talking and the sacred intimacy of conversations is Gus Van Sant's 1997 film Good Will Hunting, starring Matt Damon and Ben Affleck, who also won the Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay. Will is a brilliant, broken young man. He has a hot temper and finds himself in legal trouble, requiring him to go to a counselor and talk. And boy, can he talk. Will has spent years relying on his extraordinary intelligence and eloquence to help him escape his pain. When a know-it-all graduate student puts him down in a campus bar, Will shuts down his adversary by beating him at his own game, talking about high-level academic literature and with a charming South Boston accent to boot. When Will meets and falls for Skylar, a young English woman studying at Harvard, he invents elaborate lies about his family background. He talks well, but he keeps Skylar just out of reach, denying himself the true intimacy that he knows deep down he really wants. But Will's court-appointed counselor, Sean, played by Robin Williams, challenges Will with words like he's never heard. Sean's words humanize Will, who is part math machine, part con man, and part scared little kid. In their initial meeting, Will insults a painting that Sean has done, using textbook words to comment upon Sean's emotional state. But Sean stands up to Will in a way he has never experienced. For their next encounter, the two meet in a park, where Sean challenges Will to speak and be heard, not according to the contents of his head alone, but out of humble, heartfelt experience. Sean concludes the conversation by saying he won't talk to Will anymore unless he really offers his true self. Then, Sean says, "I'm fascinated. I'm in." Instead of his normally brash, defensive self, Will yields to the wisdom he is offered. He chooses to be a you to Sean's I. Will continues to struggle with his past through conversations with his oldest friend Chucky, who, like Sean, can be brutally honest and actually get through to Will. In the film's most powerful scene, Sean finally tells Will that he knows about the abuse he suffered as a boy in his foster home. Sean discloses his own abuse, binding the two together in common experience. And then, the floodgates open. Sean pours out grace upon Will by repeating the simplest words. "It's not your fault. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. It's not your fault." Both men are overwhelmed with emotion, and they embrace. Will decides to take a risk, be himself, and pursue a relationship with Skylar in California. Sean decides to take a risk and go explore the world as he tries to heal from the death of his wife. Through a series of difficult, honest conversations, Will and Sean are both transformed, a process that is bigger than I and you, a work accomplished only by the work of a transcendent third, God Himself, inexplicably present in the midst of feeble human discourse. I began by saying that it's normal for humans to talk. It's who we are. I'll end by saying that God talks too. It's who He is. Christians believe in the eternal Word, one of the most important titles for Jesus Christ, through whom the Father of all spoke creation into existence. The Second Vatican Council's dogmatic constitution on divine revelation puts it this way: God, who through the Word creates all things and keeps them in existence, gives men an enduring witness to Himself in created realities. In our most meaningful conversations with other people, we may therefore come to realize that God is speaking there too. And perhaps we'll ask ourselves, are we listening?